Greetings, and welcome to a story that will shatter your understanding of warfare itself. On June 7, 1944, near the quiet village of Smells in Normandy, a German officer named Klaus Müller witnessed an invasion unlike anything he had ever seen. An unrelenting tide of American vehicles pouring ashore, but these were no ordinary troop transports. Over just 2 hours, Müller counted 117 pristine, brand-new reconnaissance cars, jeeps, arriving in endless convoys, as if manufactured yesterday, not in the midst of a brutal war. How could an enemy produce such massive quantities of vehicles in secret? What does it say about American industrial might that during a single invasion, they could land more than 12,000 of these tiny machines? More than the Germans had in their entire army? Could Germany even comprehend the scale of this manufacturing marvel, where every part was interchangeable, and replacement came as quickly as a new shipment? What if the real weapon wasn't just the soldiers or guns, but this unstoppable industrial machine that turned every jeep into a symbol of American technological supremacy? And how did this relentless mobility reshape the battlefield, allowing reconnaissance units to bypass defenses, supplies to flow uninterrupted, and German strategies to become obsolete in mere days? In this video, we will uncover how the American approach to standardization, mass production, and logistics transformed modern warfare, turning the tide of history and rewriting the very nature of victory. The most astonishing part? The true power lay not just in the soldiers, but in the factories that supplied them, an industrial revolution on wheels. The journey into this mechanized revolution begins right now. On June 7, in the year of 1944, near the small village of Smells in Normandy, Oberrighter Klaus Müller of the renowned 709th Infantry Division found himself staring in shock and disbelief at an astonishing sight. A relentless procession of American military vehicles surging inland from Utah Beach. Over the course of just 2 hours, Müller meticulously counted exactly 117 reconnaissance cars, each one appearing pristine, brand new, as if it had just rolled fresh off a bustling factory assembly line. What Müller observed that morning was far more than a mere invasion. This was an industrial marvel, a phenomenon that would shatter every preconceived notion the Wehrmacht had held about modern warfare. These vehicles, which the Americans referred to as jeeps, had traversed the vast Atlantic Ocean in staggering numbers. Their sheer volume revealed a truth far more devastating than an artillery barrage or troop deployment. Germany was not merely contending with an enemy army, but with an entire industrial system capable of mass-producing war machines at an unprecedented scale. The jeeps had begun arriving with the initial wave of landings, driving directly off landing ship tanks that had crossed the English Channel in endless, ceaseless convoys. Each of these landing ships, designated as LSTs, could carry up to 30 fully assembled jeeps, and hundreds of these vessels were ferrying their precious cargo along the coast of Normandy. The vehicles bore markings from the Willis Overland Motor Company of Toledo, Ohio, or from the Ford Motor Company of Dearborn, Michigan. Officially, they were designated as truck quarter-ton 4x4 command reconnaissance vehicles, but to the German soldiers watching this invasion unfold before their eyes, they represented something far more threatening and ominous than simple military transport. These jeeps stood as tangible evidence of an industrial capacity that defied comprehension, a relentless manufacturing machine capable of producing war vehicles in staggering numbers. Vera Linderman, commander of the 3rd Company of the 919th Grenadier Regiment, documented this in a report dated June 9, 1944. He noted with a mixture of awe and concern, "The enemy possesses vehicles in quantities we reserved for ammunition rounds." Every American unit, down to the smallest squad, appears to be motorized. Yesterday, we destroyed 12 of their reconnaissance cars. This morning, I counted 40 in the same sector. Linderman observed that the Americans handled their complex military vehicles as casually as they would rifle cartridges, items to be used, discarded, and replaced without a second thought. Had German military planners known the true extent of American Jeep production, they would have been utterly stunned. Between 1941 and 1945, American factories manufactured over 640,000 Jeeps, an astonishing number. At the peak of production, companies like Willis Overland and Ford were completing one vehicle every 90 seconds on their assembly lines. This single type of vehicle accounted for a quarter of all American military motor transport produced during the war. The Germans, who had managed to produce merely around 50,000 vehicles of similar purpose over the entire course of the conflict, could hardly grasp the scale of this industrial achievement. Such numbers were beyond their wildest expectations and underscored the technological and logistical superiority the Americans had developed in the face of war's chaos. What made this incredible level of production possible was a standardization process that surpassed anything seen in German military manufacturing. Every Jeep, whether built by Willis or Ford, used parts that were entirely interchangeable. A transmission taken from a destroyed Ford GPW could be swiftly installed into a Willis MB in mere minutes, showcasing a level of modularity and consistency that revolutionized wartime logistics. Wheels, engines, axles, and even small components like spark plugs and fan belts were uniform across all models and production runs. This standardization extended beyond individual vehicles into the entire supply system, creating an efficient, streamlined process that enabled the United States to maintain a continuous and overwhelming flow of these vehicles into the theater of war, fundamentally transforming the nature of mechanized warfare in the mid-20th century. The Americans adopted a radically different approach to vehicle maintenance and logistics, one that was meticulously planned based on detailed statistical analysis of failure rates. This analysis allowed them to pre-position spare parts precisely where they would be needed most, ensuring that replacement components were always readily available, no matter how intense the combat situation became. Hansrika Feld-Webel of the 716th Static Infantry Division, who was observing American operations from a concealed position near Carendt, recorded his impressions in his diary, providing a rare glimpse into the contrasting military philosophies. He noted that the Americans did not bother with repairing their vehicles in the traditional sense. Instead, they relied on a strategy of outright replacement, taking out the damaged parts and quickly swapping them with fresh, pre-stocked components from their supply chain. He described witnessing a vehicle, severely damaged, being restored to operational status in under an hour. Instead of repairing the engine on the spot, the Americans simply removed the entire engine and replaced it with a new one, a process that involved unbolting, lifting out the old engine, and installing a brand new unit as casually as changing a tire. In stark contrast, Feld-Webel pointed out that German mechanics would have required at least a week to perform such a complex operation, even under ideal conditions. The Americans, meanwhile, executed these replacements in the field amid sporadic artillery fire, all while casually smoking cigarettes, showcasing a level of operational efficiency and confidence that seemed almost effortless. The deeply ingrained German military doctrine, which emphasized meticulous preservation and maintenance of every piece of equipment, found itself struggling to understand and accept this American methodology. In the German army, every vehicle was assigned to a specific unit and rigorously tracked throughout its entire service life. Losing a vehicle due to negligence was considered a serious offense, even punishable by court-martial, reflecting a culture of conservation and accountability. German mechanics diagnosed mechanical issues with precision and repaired or manufactured spare parts carefully when replacements were unavailable. Their vehicles, such as the Kubelwagen, the German equivalent of the Jeep, required factory-trained mechanics for any significant maintenance work, emphasizing a reliance on specialized skills and elaborate procedures. In stark contrast, the Americans operated on principles that prioritized rapid replacement over repair. They had calculated that the average combat lifespan of a Jeep was roughly 90 days, a figure they planned around meticulously. Instead of investing heavily in expensive repair facilities, they focused on mass-producing replacement vehicles and parts in quantities that far exceeded any expected loss rate. When a Jeep was damaged beyond immediate repair, it was quickly stripped of usable parts and abandoned on the battlefield. A fresh vehicle would arrive within hours or days, delivered by the continuous flow of convoys connecting the beaches to the advancing front lines. Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Schroeder, the Chief of Staff of the 352nd Infantry Division, vividly captured this American mindset in a letter to his wife. He wrote that the Americans fought a rich man's war, expending vehicles as liberally as they expended ammunition. He recounted an incident where a Jeep struck a mine. The crew, unharmed, transferred their equipment to another vehicle that had appeared within minutes, and they resumed their mission without delay. The destroyed Jeep was simply pushed to the roadside and left behind. In the German army, such a loss would trigger numerous reports, investigations, and weeks of effort to replace the vehicle, reflecting a very different approach to logistics and resource management. By the 10th of June, American forces had landed over 12,000 vehicles in Normandy, with Jeeps forming the largest single category among them. These vehicles fundamentally transformed the battlefield, introducing a level of mobility and flexibility that German military doctrine had not anticipated. American reconnaissance units could penetrate German lines with unprecedented speed and agility, thanks in part to the presence of Jeeps. Forward observers in Jeeps could relocate rapidly, making it almost impossible for the Germans to effectively counterfire. Supply units maintained continuous contact with the advancing forces, eliminating the pauses for consolidation and regrouping that German commanders had expected. This relentless tempo of movement and the ability to quickly adapt to battlefield conditions created a tactical advantage that was difficult for the German military to counter, fundamentally altering the nature of ground combat in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. The resilience of the American Jeeps significantly intensified the difficulties faced by the German forces. Thanks to their four-wheel drive capability and inherently light weight, these vehicles could navigate terrains that German military strategists had previously deemed impassable for conventional vehicles. The rugged landscape of Norman bog country, characterized by sunken roads, dense hedgerows, and natural obstacles, was expected to funnel American military traffic into narrow choke points, areas where German defenses could concentrate fire and inflict maximum damage. Instead, the Jeeps demonstrated an extraordinary ability to forge their own paths. They darted across open fields, climbed over embankments, and weaved around natural and artificial barriers, effectively establishing a decentralized network of roads that bypassed the prescribed routes laid out by German planners. This improvisational mobility rendered many of the German defensive plans obsolete and frustrated their attempts to contain the advancing Americans. In the aftermath of the battle, Hans von Luck, a commanding officer of a battle group within the 21st Panzer Division, reflected on the impact of American vehicle mobility in a post-war account. He observed that the Jeep had accorded each American unit a level of mobility comparable to that traditionally associated with elite mechanized formations, an achievement that dramatically enhanced their operational flexibility. According to Fonluck, a single Jeep could serve multiple roles. It could carry a machine gun team, transport a mortar crew, or be loaded with communications equipment or supplies. These vehicles appeared ubiquitously on the battlefield, often in places where German troops believed their positions to be secure, delivering firepower, facilitating communication, or calling in artillery strikes via radio. The American tactics of driving around fixed positions prevented the Germans from establishing a continuous front line, rendering their defensive efforts fragmented and ineffective. Furthermore, American logistical support systems proved to be just as formidable as their combat units. The scale of supply operations was on an industrial level. Ships arrived daily, not merely with fuel and ammunition but also with a steady flow of fully assembled vehicles, spare engines, transmissions, and prepackaged sets of all necessary components. Mobile repair workshops swiftly moved behind combat units, equipped to perform any repair or replacement needed in the field. If a unit lost 10 Jeeps in battle, 10 replacements would typically arrive within 48 hours, often in less time, ensuring that the momentum was maintained and that the American forces remained highly mobile. Major Heinrich Zimmermann of the 12th SS Panzer Division observed that the American supply system functioned like a vast factory production line stretched across the battlefield. Every element was standardized, packaged, and delivered precisely on schedule, effectively removing much of the friction traditionally associated with warfare, as described by Clausewitz. While the Germans grappled with maintaining their existing equipment and repairing damage, the Americans continued to order replacements as if browsing through a catalog, with the process streamlined and almost effortless. The psychological impact of this logistical prowess and material abundance on German soldiers was profound and immediate. Within days of the invasion, German troops who had been led to believe that Americans relied heavily on material comforts and dependence on logistics were confronted with an enemy that possessed a staggering abundance of equipment and supplies. The sight of endless columns of identical, brand-new Jeeps, each fully equipped and ready for combat, was demoralizing for the German forces. Many soldiers attempted to preserve their older, battle-worn vehicles, some having served since the Polish campaign, but the relentless appearance of these pristine American vehicles underscored the disparity. Gerrit Wolfgang Braun, a mechanic attached to the 21st Panzer Division, examined captured Jeeps and noted the remarkable design philosophy behind them. He reported that every component was engineered for mass production and straightforward replacement. The engines, though simple, were sufficiently capable, and the transmissions were built to be durable rather than refined. The overall finish of the vehicles was utilitarian. Nothing was polished or fitted with precision, but everything functioned reliably under harsh conditions. The Americans had sacrificed aesthetic elegance in favor of large-scale quantity, a strategy that was ultimately turning the tide of the conflict in their favor. Among the most unsettling aspects for the German soldiers was the racial integration visible within American motor pools. African American soldiers, often unfamiliar to the Nazi indoctrination, drove, maintained, and supervised these motorized units. This stark reality directly challenged deeply ingrained Nazi racial ideologies, which had long regarded such integration as undesirable or even unnatural. The sight of African American servicemen working alongside their white counterparts, efficiently managing the maintenance and operation of the Jeep fleet, served as a potent symbol of the ideological discrepancy between American principles of equality and the racist doctrines upheld by the Nazi regime. It was a vivid manifestation of the profound social and institutional differences that underscored the broader conflict, one in which material superiority and organizational prowess increasingly translated into battlefield dominance, much to the dismay of the German forces. The stark contrast between the two armies' approaches to mechanized warfare revealed itself vividly through their equipment, logistics, and underlying industrial philosophies. Despite the deeply ingrained Nazi assumptions about racial hierarchy and the supposed superiority of German military efficiency, there were moments that directly challenged these prejudiced notions. For instance, the remarkable performance of African American soldiers, or Negro soldiers, came as a surprise to many German observers. Feldwebel Kurt Wagner, a German officer, expressed his astonishment with an almost bewildered tone when he observed that these soldiers could operate and repair American vehicles just as skillfully and efficiently as their white counterparts. Such observations clashed sharply with the racial theories that suggested racial differences would translate into disparities in technical competence and combat effectiveness. Yet, the evidence was clear and undeniable. These soldiers proved capable, resourceful, and highly effective. Meanwhile, American modifications to their jeeps underscored a level of flexibility and adaptability that the rigid, often slow-moving German military culture could not match. Within the span of days after the landing, American units demonstrated ingenuity by welding additional armor plates onto their vehicles, installing wire cutters to deal with German defenses made of piano wire, mounting multiple machine guns for increased firepower, and customizing vehicles for specific roles, whether as ambulances, radio units, or mine detectors. These modifications, though sometimes crude by German standards, proved immediately effective on the battlefield, allowing American forces to respond swiftly to emerging challenges. In stark contrast, German equipment remained highly specialized and less adaptable. German vehicles often required specific types of fuel, specialized spare parts, and trained mechanics, resources that were increasingly in short supply as the campaign progressed. Many German units still relied heavily on horse-drawn transport, with each division needing thousands of horses that consumed vast quantities of fodder daily. These animals were vulnerable to artillery attacks, demanded constant care, and moved at only a walking pace, severely limiting the mobility and flexibility of German forces. Watching the Americans advance at speeds of 30 miles per hour in vehicles that only required gasoline and basic maintenance was not only a logistical advantage but also a deeply demoralizing sight for German troops. By June 15, German intelligence estimated that the American forces in Normandy possessed over 4,000 jeeps, with hundreds more arriving every day. This figure seemed almost impossible to German officers, especially considering their memories of the entire German invasion of Poland, which involved fewer than 3,000 motor vehicles of all types. The sheer scale of American production suggested that even if all vehicles in Normandy were destroyed, the United States could replace them all within a mere 2 weeks. Such rapid replacement capability highlighted the enormous industrial disparity between the two nations. Colonel Ernst Wagner of the Panzer Division compiled a comprehensive report, which he presented to Field Marshal Rommel shortly before his injury. In this report, Wagner emphasized the alarming extent of America's industrial mobilization. "We face an enemy who has industrialized warfare to a degree we never imagined possible. They mass-produce military vehicles with the same methods they apply to civilian automobiles. Every American soldier seems to know how to drive and perform basic maintenance, which is ingrained into their society's fabric." He pointed out that the entire American society was mobilized for mechanical warfare in a way that Germany's efforts could scarcely match. The disparity in industrial strategies was evident in the quality and quantity of vehicles produced. German vehicles like the Kubelware were meticulously engineered, carefully constructed, and designed for durability, reflecting the German pursuit of perfection. However, at their peak, Germany's factories could produce only a few dozen of these vehicles each day. On the other hand, American Jeeps, though crude by German standards, simple, rugged, and less refined, rolled off assembly lines at rates that German industry simply could not sustain, even with all its factories combined. Where the Germans aimed for perfection, the Americans prioritized sufficiency and mass production, creating overwhelming numbers of serviceable vehicles that rendered German efforts comparatively ineffective. General Major Fritz Bioline, commander of the Panzer Division, provided a stark and sobering assessment of the situation. He observed that the Germans were fighting the last war, relying on outdated tactics and equipment, while the Americans were already preparing for the future, leveraging the latest industrial and technological advancements. The German approach, focused on precision and longevity, was no match for the American strategy, mass production and adaptability, an imbalance that ultimately favored the Allies in this brutal conflict. Command was increasingly overwhelmed by the relentless advance of American mechanized forces, which seemed to operate with a fluidity and efficiency that the Germans simply could not match. The American military's approach was not merely about numbers or firepower but centered around the revolutionary use of mobility and logistical flexibility. While the Germans relied heavily on traditional tactics, stationary defenses, and limited, carefully rationed supplies, the Americans demonstrated an almost reckless abundance of resources, transforming the battlefield into a dynamic, constantly shifting terrain. The contrast was striking. American vehicles, particularly the iconic Jeeps, had become more than just military transport. They embodied the very essence of American logistical superiority. These versatile vehicles were seen everywhere, serving roles far beyond their original purpose. Soldiers reported witnessing Jeeps used for tasks that would have been considered inconceivable in the German army, such as delivering mail and urgent messages, transporting journalists covering the front, hauling chaplains to provide spiritual support close to combat zones, and even carrying the personal belongings of generals. This casual, almost nonchalant use of military equipment for convenience, not out of necessity, highlighted a level of wealth and resource plenitude that left German soldiers awestruck and somewhat demoralized. German troops, conditioned to scarcity and strict discipline in resource management, found this display of abundance both astonishing and disheartening. Lieutenant Friedrich Hoffmann, in a letter to his family, vividly described this disparity, noting that the Americans utilized their vehicles much like Europeans used bicycles, without hesitation and for every conceivable purpose. He recounted witnessing a Jeep delivering hot food to a remote outpost, a trip that not only consumed fuel and put wear on the vehicle but did so for the comfort of a mere 3 men. To Hoffmann and many Germans, such wastage was a sign of weakness, yet paradoxically, it became a form of strength, showcasing confidence in the reliability of American logistics and the absence of scarcity that haunted German forces. This technological and logistical disparity manifested in numerous, often unexpected ways. American Jeeps arrived equipped with standardized toolkits, detailed maintenance manuals printed on waterproof paper, and spare parts packages calculated meticulously through statistical analysis to ensure rapid repairs. In stark contrast, German vehicles often lacked basic tools altogether and depended heavily on mechanics' experience rather than precise documentation. Their spare parts supply chain was a cumbersome, slow process, requiring complex requisition procedures and often taking weeks to fulfill critical needs. This disparity meant that, As June turned into July, German forces increasingly found themselves unable to match the rapid mobility of their American opponents. The battlefield itself was transforming into a fluid, unpredictable environment where traditional defensive tactics were rendered useless. Reconnaissance units mounted on jeeps operated behind German lines, striking quickly, then disappearing before reinforcements could respond. Artillery positions, once thought secure, were overrun swiftly by fast-moving motorized infantry units. Supply lines, vital for sustaining any fighting force, were cut repeatedly by swift patrols that appeared suddenly, struck with precision, and withdrew before the Germans could mount an effective counter. This new reality underscored a fundamental shift. Victory now belonged to the side capable of deploying unlimited motorized transport and maintaining relentless tempo. The Germans observed with growing concern how American forces had achieved what they had once believed impossible: the complete motorization of an entire army. Major Wilhelm von Tauben, watching the preparations for an American breakthrough in late July, reflected this sentiment when he noted, "They have accomplished something we thought was beyond reach. They have achieved full motorization of their entire force. Every soldier is now mobile by vehicle. Every artillery piece can be towed at highway speeds. Every supply item can be delivered directly to the front lines." For the Germans, this meant fighting a war rooted in outdated tactics, a conflict from the 19th century, against an enemy equipped with the technological and logistical innovations of the 20th. The High Command recognized that their traditional methods were increasingly outmoded in the face of American ingenuity and resource abundance, which had transformed the battlefield into a domain where speed, flexibility, and continuous supply were the keys to victory. This relentless advance left the German military struggling to adapt, fighting not just against American troops but against an entirely different kind of warfare, one driven by unparalleled mobility and logistical superiority. The German efforts to counteract the rapid spread of American motorization proved to be ultimately futile and ineffective. Attempts to target the concentration of vehicles on the battlefield quickly became meaningless, as vehicles seemed to be everywhere, scattered across roads, fields, and even hidden in improvised depots, making it impossible to isolate or destroy them systematically. Efforts aimed at disrupting supply lines faltered because every military unit, regardless of its size or role, had its own organic transportation, rendering traditional interdiction strategies redundant. The Germans also devised plans to exploit the Americans' reliance on fuel, hoping that cutting off gasoline supplies would hamper their motorized capabilities. However, these strategies were rendered irrelevant by a supply system that was astonishingly efficient and resilient, delivering gasoline in vast quantities that Germany had not seen since the year of 1940, just before the outbreak of the war. By the time Operation Cobra commenced in late July, the American forces in Normandy had amassed an impressive number of vehicles, totaling over 15,000 in count. Among these, jeeps formed the largest single category, symbolizing the core of American mobility and logistical strength. German intelligence, gathered from prisoner interrogations and aerial reconnaissance, estimated that even if the Americans suffered losses of up to half their vehicles, they would still remain more motorized than any German division at full strength. When this estimate was conveyed to Berlin, it was dismissed as overly pessimistic or overly cautious, an assessment driven by wishful thinking rather than factual analysis. In reality, however, this estimate was conservative. The true extent of American motorization was even more formidable. The influence of this American approach to military mobility extended far beyond the battlefield and had lasting implications for post-war Germany. German officers who survived the conflict would carry these lessons into the reconstruction of their shattered country, recognizing the transformative power of American industrial and logistical practices. The American model of standardization, mass production, and a focus on simplicity in design had a profound and lasting impact on German industrial development after 1945. The iconic Volkswagen, which had previously failed to compete with American Jeep vehicles during the war, would later succeed as the Beetle in peacetime, applying the very principles of mass production and efficiency demonstrated so convincingly by Americans. Otto Schultz, a German army officer who spent 3 years as a prisoner of war in the United States, later reflected that during the Normandy campaign, it became clear that modern warfare was less about individual acts of bravery or skill and more about industrial capacity and logistical dominance. The Americans had shown that victory in modern warfare belonged to those capable of producing the most equipment, deploying it rapidly, and replacing losses without delay. The Jeep was no longer merely a vehicle. It had become a symbol of a new kind of warfare, one driven by industrial capacity and mass mobilization rather than traditional tactics. The Germans' encounters with American mass motorization in Normandy symbolized more than a simple military mismatch. They represented a fundamental clash between two different civilizations' approaches to warfare. The Germans, with their long-standing tradition of professional military excellence and meticulously maintained equipment, faced an American military that had transformed warfare into an exercise in industrial management and mass production. In the end, the endless columns of jeeps streaming across the Normandy landscape embodied something much deeper than mere military hardware. They stood as the physical manifestation of what was often described as the arsenal of democracy, a testament to American industrial might and its ability to project power across oceans and deliver vast quantities of vehicles and supplies directly to the battlefield. These columns proved that traditional military calculations, which relied heavily on manpower and manual effort, were becoming obsolete in the face of this new reality. For German soldiers watching these relentless waves of jeeps advancing, each vehicle carried a simple yet powerful message: the age of artisanal, handcrafted warfare had come to an end, replaced by the era of industrialized, mechanized combat. The profound significance of this transformation was best captured by Hetman Ernst Bergmann, who observed American military operations throughout the Normandy campaign and later became a prominent automotive engineer in post-war Germany. From his perspective, the Americans demonstrated that in modern warfare, success depended increasingly on industrial capacity, logistical efficiency, and mass production. The lessons they imparted were clear. Victory now belonged to those who could produce the most, ship the fastest, and replenish their losses swiftly. The relentless arrival of American vehicles, led by the iconic Jeeps, was more than a tactical advantage. It was a vivid illustration of a fundamental shift in the nature of war itself. These developments marked the end of an era dominated by individual heroism and handcrafted equipment. Instead, they heralded the new age of industrial warfare, where factories, assembly lines, and logistical networks determined outcomes on the battlefield. The story of German troops witnessing the overwhelming American motorization in Normandy encapsulates more than a mere military encounter. It reveals a cultural and technological clash that would reshape warfare for generations to come. In this new paradigm, victory was increasingly dictated by industrial capacity and technological innovation, transforming the very fabric of military strategy and operations for the modern age. The factory's influence now overshadowed the importance of the battlefield itself. As countless jeeps rolled in one after another, each one indistinguishable from the next and easily replaceable, it became painfully clear that modern warfare had transformed into a vast industrial enterprise. In the past, we saw ourselves as soldiers engaged in a noble, heroic struggle. But the relentless influx of these mechanized vehicles revealed a stark truth. We were nothing more than cogs in a massive machine designed for destruction. Their industrial complex, with its seemingly endless production lines and unmatched efficiency, far surpassed ours in scale and capability. It was no longer a matter of individual bravery or tactical skill. War had become an immense factory operation where the true power lay not on the battlefield, but within the sprawling, relentless machinery that fueled the conflict.